I'm going to tell you something controversial. And I don't think I've ever said this in an interview before. A lot of people ask me about, like in a negative way, what it was like being a female working in Formula One. And part of me honestly believes that being a female was one of the reasons that the F1 teams noticed me when I was sending out my applications in the first place. I actually think it was an advantage and a bonus for me being a female back in the early 2000s wanting to work in F1, because when I finally got my job at Williams, I was the only female working in a technical capacity in the company. I was the only female working in the aerodynamics facility because obviously everyone else working in that was in a technical capacity. So there was engineers, designers, model makers, and wind tunnel technicians. So no other female in the building. And the HR manager told me that at Williams, 3,000 CVs would land on her desk a week. How many of those CVs do you reckon were from women? Not
Maybe
many.
one. Two.
Maybe one. So in 3,000 CVs, how do you stand out from the other 2,999? When you get a CV from a female who wants to work in Formula One, you're going to pay attention to that because it's a little bit different to all the others. And it's funny, I never actually felt that it was a disadvantage being a female working in F1. I think women think differently to men, and I think we problem solve differently, not better or worse. I think when both come together, you find that perfect intersection of problem solving because you bring two different perspectives. But for me, I never felt like everyone tries to make it out like it must have been so hard working in a male-dominated environment. I honestly, me being a female wasn't the thing that was hard about working in Formula One, and I actually think it was like the ace up my sleeve that made me stand out from all those other people. Never said that in an interview before.
I love that.
I love it too.
Does that mean that we've started? Can we say that we've started the podcast now?
Sure.
I like that.
Great.
Well, you just brought it up. So F1, you were an aerospace engineer in F1.
Yep.
And now you're the queen of croissants. I know that you don't love
that
being
was a crown,
asked,
by the way.
That is a great crown.
Yeah, not puppy
I picked
ears.
that up, yeah. I know that you don't love the question because you addressed it at the end of your book. How did you go from there to here? Because that's a long story. We're going to get into some of that today. But I wonder, what do you think is the likeness that's allowed you to be so successful in both areas?
There's not much there's not much intersection between a Formula One car and a croissant. I think we can acknowledge that. I think the common denominator is that they were both things that I fell in love with, that I decided I was going to absolutely own. From like a professional perspective, there was nothing that was going to stop me from trying to be the best at both things. And that's honestly the common denominator. I think there have been other examples in my life where, for example, as if you've read Destination Moon, you will discover that for a hot second I wanted to be a pilot. And so I think from a young age, I've always had this dream or idea of flying planes. And then studying aerospace engineering, I learned about aerodynamics and about aircraft design. But getting your pilot's license is a really expensive thing to do, and it's a very time-consuming thing to do. And by this stage, I was happily on my path to Formula One, and then obviously later in life, I was happily on my path to creating Lune and trying to perfect the croissant. And life didn't allow a lot of time for trying to be great at other things. But I still had this dream in my mind that I wanted to be a pilot. And so a couple of years ago, actually just before we went into the pandemic, I was finally at a point in my life where I could afford flying lessons and take the time every week to go on them. And theoretically, I thought it was going to be this natural path for me. And on my first flying lesson, so this is my step number one to following this path, I was fucking terrified in the plane. I was in this, are we allowed to swear on the podcast?
Absolutely you are.
Great. I was in this tiny little tin can, like 3,000 feet up in the sky. And I'm like, I could well die at any minute. And I became so anxious and tense in the plane that I was gripping the controls, and the instructor kept saying to me, relax your grip, relax your grip. If you're not relaxed, you can't fly this plane. You have to feel the sensors around you. And the entire experience felt so alien to me. I hated it. And almost in that moment, I knew that I didn't want to be a pilot anymore. But me being me, I was stubborn. And I stuck at it for maybe about a year and a half. It was difficult with the pandemic. But I got about 25 lessons under my belt. So I got about 25 flying hours, and I hated every lesson was a struggle. I don't know quite where I'm going with this. We can figure it out. Every lesson was a struggle. I would get the sweats in the car on the way out to the airport. I would hope that it would rain so we didn't have to go up. And every weekend it didn't rain and I had to go in the plane. And I would be so relieved when the lesson was over and I was driving away. Anyway, one day my instructor said to me, you should probably go and get your CASM medical. I said, oh, well, why? And she said, well, you're very close to doing your solo to get your RPL. I said, oh, what does a solo involve? And she said, well, we'll be up flying and I'll decide that it's time for you to do your solo. And so we'll do a full stop landing. I'll get out of the plane and you'll go up by yourself. And I said, I'm out. And I never got in a plane again.
Wow.
And it was funny. I had this long conversation with my brother on the way home from the airport that day. And I'm like, Cam, my instructor thinks I'm ready to do my solo, which will give me my RPL, our recreational pilot's license. And I'm like, I don't think I can do it. I really don't want to do it. And he's like, why did you set out to do this? And why have you done the 25 hours? And I'm like, I really wanted to learn how to fly a plane. And he said, Kate, you can. It doesn't matter whether there's an instructor sitting in the plane with you or whether you're up there by yourself. Every time you go up with the instructor, you're the one flying the plane. You're the one landing it and taking off and controlling it. Yeah. He's like, you don't need a certificate to tell you that you can do it. He's like, just stop flying. You've proven it to yourself. And I've never gotten in another small plane again.
Wow. You know what? The thing that I love about that is you, at the start of this conversation, at the top of it, you addressed how people think that being a female in the F1 space is quite interesting because there are so few. I would say it's similar, but not as bad in the pilots industry.
Most definitely.
But also, thank God you didn't take your former career advisor's advice and go and be a priest, because that's even worse. Oh my God.
Can we talk about this?
Yeah, let's talk about this.
I'm shocked that in all the interviews I do, no one wants to talk about that moment, and it's so horrific. Like, okay, to give a bit of backstory.
Yeah, give us the backstory.
I was 16 years old in year 10 at school, and for a few years now, I had set in my mind that I wanted to study aerospace engineering to get a job working as a designer in Formula One. I mean, you cannot be more specific than that. I had it mapped out. I'd gone to the careers day at RMIT. I knew what I needed to study. I'd imagined being the first female technical director of an F1 team. Like, this was a girl who knew exactly what she wanted. But then in year 10, you're also required to go down to the careers counsellor and have this conversation with them about what you want to be when you grow up. And it was basically a waste of time for me. And I knew that going in. For me, it was like, we'll tick the box. She'll hear that I'm very passionate and career focused on this one specific thing, and we'll just move forward. And she'll say, well, this is what you need to do, you know, in your VCE years or your 2 final years of high school to get into aerospace. But that is not what transpired. And she kind of, I mean, back in the day, I don't even think we had the internet. And so she gave me this quiz to do on her computer, which was a Myers-Briggs style test, and asked you to answer maybe 50 questions that ranked, you know, based on your personality and your aptitude, what an appropriate career would be for you. And I was just expecting that at the very least, this like questionnaire would tell me I was going to be an engineer at minimum. And the answer that it gave was priest.
It's so crazy, isn't it?
Priest. Like, and this was at a Catholic girls' school where we'd been told for 4 years straight that women weren't allowed to be leaders in the Catholic Church. And the fact that the careers counsellor didn't see that response on the computer and decide it wasn't worth saying to me, that was how disconnected she was from the whole process of guiding young girls into their young adult life where they might embark on a career, she didn't care. She thought it was appropriate to tell me that the computer had told her I should be a priest.
Can I say what's really interesting about this to me, which I think is you'll resonate with this, because there's obviously a huge part of who you are that is very science driven, right?
Yeah.
But I acknowledge that one thing we spoke about off camera before is creativity. And I had an early guest on the podcast who was actually Mick Fenning's movement coach, Taylor
Wow.
Cecil, who said to me, Brad, I believe training is 50% art, 50% science. And I've always liked that analogy for
Training.
life. Yeah, because
Yeah.
he said, you know, especially in a sport like surfing, which I'm not well versed in, but there is an art to the movement and there is an intuitiveness to the way that you move your body and manipulate your body to score a point on a
Yeah,
wave.
sure.
But there's also a science to understanding the mechanics of the movement and what works and what doesn't. But it's interesting that when you plug everything into the science world or into the system world, you don't always get truth or the right answers, because I think life's not that rigid. And so to suggest that a test is going to be the thing that decides what you do for the rest of your life, I think is a really prehistoric way of thinking.
Yeah, and I hope that is not currently being carried out in high schools around Australia anymore. We're not talking about that long ago, maybe just under 3 decades ago. 3 decades, a lot has changed, but that moment happened. And thank you for sharing that, by the way, because it's such an accurate representation of such a disengaged woman who wasn't taking into account all these other factors that this passionate kid had walked into her office wanting to talk about the thing that she wanted to pursue and looking for support and guidance with that. She ignored all of those other factors and just looked to this questionnaire. But then when I rebutted and said, oh, I don't want to be a priest, this is what I want, the worst thing was that she said to me, you're a girl, you probably won't get the scores required to get into aerospace engineering at RMIT, and you probably won't survive in a male-dominated environment. So I suggest you just go study arts. Can you send the next girl in? And that is worse than her disengaging with me on that computer survey, because then there was a real kid sitting in front of her telling her what my dreams and aspirations were, and she just dismissed all of it. And it's funny, that could have had a really negative impact on me, but I walked out of that room and I'm like, I'm going to show her. And it fueled me. But I think because I was so resolute and I am resilient and determined, and probably my parents would say pig-headed sometimes as well. When I decide I want something, nothing will stop me. So luckily I had those traits to push past that advice of the careers counsellor. But I can guarantee you that girls would have gone into that room before and after me and maybe have had their career dreams dashed. And that is disgraceful, because her one job was to encourage young women to pursue whatever they wanted to pursue. And that's to this day, she's probably my greatest arch nemesis I've ever come across. But I did show her.
Absolutely, you did. I think you raise a great point, because I sit in front of you and I listen to the book, right? And
cool.
the whole thing, and I loved it. And I mentioned to you prior that I've heard you on a podcast many moons ago.
Many moons ago, I appreciate that. Yep.
And was fascinated with your story. And sitting in front of you now today, having met you, you're a superstar. I genuinely believe you could do anything that you want to do with your life, because you have something that we'll talk about in a minute that I find is a very interesting character trait. And I know there's a bit of a duality to it, but you also have a likeness that when you sit in a room, I feel like people attract to you. This is really enjoyable. You have a great personality, which makes me think if you have a great personality, I genuinely think it means that if you apply yourself to anything, you can achieve it.
That's such a big compliment. Thank you. One of the things that's really come out since the book's been published is how vulnerable I am in the book. And I think it is a bit of a superpower that I can be very vulnerable when I meet new people. And I think innately I really want to create a connection with a new person quickly to see whether we can have chemistry and a good conversation and find a common ground. And I do think that that is a bit of a superpower. It's funny, I think the word vulnerable up until recently has probably had negative connotations. But for me, it's such a strength to be able to be vulnerable and to be okay with whatever happens after that. And
Absolutely.
before we started recording, we were talking about trolls on social media. And I am yet to figure out how to have that thick skin to deal with them. But being vulnerable means that people will see your vulnerability as a weakness. And I think it's your responsibility as the person being vulnerable to figure out how to actually make it a strength. And for all those people out there that will attack it as a weakness, for me, it's worth it to be able to make a great connection with someone upon first meeting, to have a real conversation. As my literary agent said to me recently about my book, if it's not real, what's the point?
Absolutely.
And I kind of love that attitude for life. Yeah.
That's great. And I think that it's important to note that whilst we spoke about thick skin, I think you got to remember we're human too, right?
Yep.
So, I've never really understood the thought space that, nobody's outside opinions can affect me. Because I think, well, we're not wired that way. We're actually wired to want to be communal and have
Yeah.
people and be connected. And so there is a level of, I think, just general biology that makes us predisposed to caring about what people think. We just exist in a world where more people that will never matter to you get to have an opinion.
So this is my problem. Like you said, we're all human. And when I think about these trolls who have never met me, who don't know like a fraction of the detail that they need to know to be sharing the opinions that they're sharing, when I think about them, I'm like, but they're humans too. They're human too. And like the thoughts that they have that they share, never in a million years would I ever dream of doing something like that to someone, let alone someone I'd never met that I didn't know. And I really struggle to put myself in the headspace of those people. I truly do not understand being nasty to someone for no reason. I don't get it.
At risk of using a profanity that some people hate, just a reminder, you can be a human and a cunt at the same time.
I hope you say
Yeah.
that.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. That's something that I've learned is I feel like some people are just wired in a way where they want to feel like they are special, and their way of doing that
Or
is
they
not
want
to
to cut
rise
you
up,
down.
but to bring other people down. That is just the world we exist in, unfortunately.
Do you know that I'm making a concerted effort in my life now, and it's taken me probably 43 years to get to this point. I am only surrounding myself with people that have none of that trait in them,
Absolutely.
because I only want to be surrounded by people that want to rise other people up and support them, because I hope that I'm that person as well. I mean, we're none of us are perfect, but I would never try and bring someone down in that way.
No.
It's a foreign concept to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I want to turn the page. So I want to talk about something I picked up, and I think a lot of people who've interviewed you and spoken to you about your book have picked this up, that you have an obsessive personality. And I think obsession and perfectionism are cousins. They play in the same space.
I
They are
agree.
related. And one of the early quotes in your book, you said, perfectionism is undoubtedly a character flaw. Now, when I see your success, I see this is the product of a person who is obsessed and has applied themselves to something and has reaped the rewards. But I think a lot of your challenges too are also linked to this obsession and perfectionism. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's a character flaw, but I also think it's one of those almost, when you imagine the superheroes created by Marvel or whatever, all of them have that flip side personality where their superpower is also the thing that brings them down. So for me, perfectionism is the reason, or perfectionism and its closely related cousin, obsession. Those two things have worked in tandem with me to allow me to set myself really big challenges and goals, and then have the tenacity to work towards them in a way that otherwise I wouldn't have achieved them. But then, like, if we're talking about the everyday struggles of Kate Reid, perfectionism, I think it really slows me down. It's sometimes it can just make a very simple task that doesn't require perfectionist levels take a lot longer than it needs to. And for example, if I walk away from something that's 90% good enough, the amount that bothers me in that first step of walking away from it makes me turn back around and do it to 100%, or sometimes more than 100%, if that's possible, like fiddling around with it to make sure that when I walk away from it next time, I know that I can't have done it any better. But I think that results in me being late quite a lot. Like I don't factor in time in the day for my perfectionism, and I don't like being late because that's not being perfect. But I'd prefer to do a task as well as I can and then show up late and a bit flustered. And then there's probably that knock-on effect, like a doctor that's always running late in their appointments to the point where you're the last appointment of the day and you're 2 hours late. Maybe that's me at the end of the day, but it's the series of tasks that I had to do throughout the day. And I'm kind of okay with that. I mean, maybe a younger me who was a little bit more self-conscious and worried about what the world thought would have been too nervous to sit in front of you and say that. But like, I don't really care now. Like, I love my apartment looking perfect. I love, using my Dyson and vacuuming it twice a day to get rid of the dog hair, because having my dog in my life is one of the most special things, but I don't like dog hair around the apartment. So I don't know. It's on a day-to-day level, that's perfectionism as a flaw and how it plays out. But then if we're talking about much bigger things, obviously in the middle of the book, I really delve into my mental health and how it deteriorated during my time working in Formula One to the point where I became incredibly ill. And I think that's perfectionism and obsession really having their flip side of the superpower, and them going to town on me in a very negative way. So
I want to talk about that in a moment, but I just pulled up a quote on my laptop from your Australian Story interview, which I found fascinating, by the way. I thought they did a very good job of that. And there was a gentleman who, sorry, I'm not sure I have the name of here, but he said the croissant was invented in Vienna, celebrated in France, but it might be fair to say it was perfected in Melbourne by Kate Reid.
yeah, that is Pat Nurse, and he is a widely celebrated expert in the food world. And to hear those words come out of his mouth were almost equally as powerful as having that New York Times piece written about Lune a decade ago. For someone as incredible as Pat to think that, let alone voice it aloud on national TV, meant like an inordinate amount to me.
So do you think that compliments like that and receiving what I guess would be the obvious recognition of how amazing Lune is and how much of an incredible business you've built has allowed you to be okay with the fact that it can be both a character flaw and a strength? Do you think that's maturity and experience allowing you to go, hey, it's okay for not everything to be perfect, but it's okay to want to try?
I think another way to answer that question is that maybe since creating Lune, where I was able to turn perfectionism and obsession into positive qualities that drove me forward in a positive way, I've embraced the fact that perfect is the unachievable goal. Like nothing can ever be perfect, but if your goal is for something to be perfect, you've always got something to work toward. And as an engineer, I love measurable progress. I like being able to, even if it's just 1% better every day, maybe today it's not perfect, tomorrow it's not, the next day, or in 100 years it's not going to be perfect. But every time you try to do it better, it's getting a little bit closer to that. So perfectionism is the goal that makes me want to get up every day and try to make something better. So yes, comments like that, an accolade coming from someone so celebrated in the world of hospitality and food, makes me feel like those people can also see that the work that we do at Lune is continuing to drive for example, the viennoiserie world or the world of croissants forward in a measurable way every day. And it's incredibly rewarding to hear that. Yeah.
Can we talk about, you touched on before, the mental health period and the challenges with anorexia, which I know right at the end of your book it's the epilogue, isn't it, that's at the end? I've just written a book and I've got to refresh my memory on this.
I'm the same. I'm like prologue, epilogue.
Epilogue.
Which one's the end? I
Yeah.
think epilogue.
Well, they were both brilliant in your book, so it doesn't really matter, does it? But the end, you speak about how anorexia never really leaves you. It's
No.
always with you. And I wonder, I listened to the book and I could hear how intense your time in life in F1 was.
Yeah.
And how that obviously led to burnout. I think there are very, very few people, I know I'm certainly not one of them, who can work under that kind of intense condition consistently and sustainably without burning out or breaking down.
I feel like this is my chance with you now here to set the record straight. If I had have found the work stimulating in a way that satisfied me intellectually and physically the way I needed a job to, I would have happily worked every one of those hours under the sun and be driven forward and motivated. But the environment that I was working in and the style of work that I was given did not give me what I need to feel professionally fulfilled. And as such, giving so much of yourself without getting anything back was the thing that became that perfect storm for me, which led to the depression and anorexia. But like, I love working hard. How good is it when you work a huge day and you achieve and you progress and you move forward and you get home and you're so tired that night that you have a soundless sleep because you've achieved everything that you wanted to in that day and you're tired, you've earned your tired. I love earning my tired.
Yeah, and I think you've answered my question for me, because I was going to ask, how do you avoid that kind of burnout and that kind of
You
breakdown
admit
in
that
your
the
business now?
situation's not right for you.
Yeah, so it's about feeling like you're in the right place.
Well, yeah, it's about knowing that you are. And like, I guess the beauty of Lune is that I got to create the business with the environment that I'd wished Formula One was, in a bakery way. So Lune is a business that focuses on innovation on a day-to-day basis. I think a lot of people out there wouldn't realize that. They come in and they buy a croissant and a coffee and they have a nice morning. But every day behind the scenes, every part of that business is being critically analysed to see how we could do it better. Not just the croissants, but like how we run our HR department, or how a small part of the customer front of house service, how do we pack the croissants in the boxes, or how do we train a staff member to pack the croissants in the boxes? Every part of the business is open to critical analysis, and we are constantly trying to push it forward. And unlike when I worked in Formula One, I wasn't given the agency to bring my ideas forward and explore them. At Lune, every staff member has the opportunity to bring their ideas forward and explore them, because maybe they've seen the business in a way that, the founder or the co-owners or the general manager or the executive chef hasn't had that idea. And maybe it might be the idea that just allows us to take like a quantum leap forward in our business. And if we don't test it, we've missed that opportunity. So I do try to make it a business that everyone who's working in it feels like they can contribute in their own very meaningful and impactful way.
So Lune is the cherry on top, because it's the product of years in this business and years of experimentation, to the fact where you've created this incredible product. But, the flour, the early part of the cake, is all of the years in apprenticeship and learning and development, in which in the book you describe the early years at Philippa's as being equal parts pain and pleasure.
Well, that was because I was still very much in the depths of the eating disorder. Yeah. So I put myself in a job, and I actually love the way I describe it in the book. It was like a 10-hour staring competition with temptation. And I also like challenging myself in day-to-day life, and sitting or standing behind a counter that's adorned with the most delicious baked goods all day, but being an anorexic and not wanting to eat that. If I got to the end of a day at work and I'd resisted even snacking on something, for me, that was like the ultimate success. And I was really proud of myself. That was me gaining that self-reward that I guess I look for in all aspects of life. But if I nibbled on something because, God forbid, I was hungry, for me, that was ultimate failure. And I would really punish myself and beat myself up for failing, like failing resisting temptation. So I'm not really sure what the question was about Philippa's, but
Well, yeah, I wondered why it was equal parts pain and pleasure, and you just answered that
yeah.
with, the fact that it was linked to your challenges at the time. It's one of the things that really stood out to me is because I think that it's obvious that the way your brain works, you could disguise some of those challenges as positives,
Or
as
you mean
thing.
trick myself? Or
Yeah, yeah, you could put a mask on them and say that an this is an honor because I have so much self-control. This is an
yeah,
achievement, right? But ultimately it was hurting you. It was
yeah.
setting you back in your life, right? And I've heard you speak about it a couple of times now, but when your mum on the Australian Story interview describes seeing you when you arrived home with your
Mm,
dad from the UK and he brought you back, and I could see how much pain it was for her to describe that, even now, and then
yeah.
you seeing that and your emotional reaction to that. I think it's fair to say that when you're in the grips of a challenge like that, you really have your blinkers on. You can only see your journey. It's very hard to see anything around you, right?
That's a incredibly perceptive thing to say. I
Mm.
think one of the things about anorexia is it makes you the most selfish version of yourself. Like you're doing this thing to yourself, but you can't really see how it's impacting everyone around you because your sole focus is just to be thinner and to be lighter. And if someone else around you is trying to hinder you from doing that, they just become the enemy. So it's like the eating the eating disorder really becomes this like evil personality that takes you over. And yeah, at the time I was probably still in deep denial when I came back from the UK that morning, and mum was there at the airport to pick us up, and I didn't see that there was anything wrong with me physically, but mum saw a daughter that was half the size that she was when she'd seen her last time, and very ill. And I think my cousin said to me a couple of weeks ago, and this, I had to see this through the lens of my parents because I'm not a parent. He said to me, a thing that's really stuck with me is, as a parent, you are only as healthy as your sickest child. And when he said that to me, actually my mind flashed back to that moment where dad brought me home and mum picked us up from the airport. And it's a very visceral thing to say, like mum wasn't the physically ill one, but something that was from her was so unwell that I think I think that the saying kind of speaks for itself,
It
actually.
does.
And it's now looking at it from a healthy perspective through the lens of my parents. It must have been a shocking and terrible time for them to go through, to have so little control over what was happening with me.
I don't know how to ask this question without sounding potentially insensitive, so bear with
Say
me
it.
here. Do you think that if you could have had, and I know it's almost an impossible question to answer, but if Kate Reid of today could have gone back and spoken to Kate Reid in that moment to say, hey, look around and see how this is affecting other people, do you think it could have aided your recovery? Or do you think that that's just an impossible task when you're in the grips of it?
I think it's an impossible task for me particularly. I can't speak for other people who have gone through or are going through something similar, but I think it's quite clear that I'm somebody that's driven by the need for purpose. And when I was in the grips of anorexia, I didn't have a purpose. So the eating disorder became my purpose. It took the place of something positive. And I was actually chatting to my beautiful friend Em the other day. I had this realization that the anorexia was kind of a ticking time bomb. And innately, I knew that the only way I would recover from it is if I found another purpose. But my health was declining and it was kind of a race against the clock. Like, if I didn't find a new purpose on time, anorexia would have killed me, because I'm not someone that can live without purpose. And ultimately, it would have been my organs collapsing and failing me, or it would have been probably my mental health getting so bad that I didn't want to exist anymore. So the recovery process was tough because to the outside world, everyone's probably like, just feed her more. But mum and dad did understand that my recovery was going to require me finding something to that purpose to take the place of the eating disorder. And you can't, this like even, in an intimate relationship, you can't manufacture chemistry. You can't manufacture purpose in life. You've got to find it, and I mean, it sounds like you're very similar to me with the things that you love, that you're like, actually, this is something that I really want to throw all my energy behind and pursue because it gives me purpose. You can't fake that. I had to find the purpose before the anorexia got me. And that's kind of a scary thought because it might not have happened.
Do you ever think about that? What would have happened if you didn't?
I've thought about it the last couple of weeks for the first time. Like, I think your life plays out the way it plays out. And it was so lucky that I came across baked goods and they gave me what I needed. And croissants in particular, like that stimulated me on all the levels I needed stimulation, like not just the physicality of creating something delicious, but the highly technical nature of a croissant that really tapped into the aerospace engineering brain. But I've never really thought about what would have happened if I didn't find it until, as I said, I was chatting to Em and that thought came to me. It was a race against the clock. And that's terrifying. Yeah.
There's two things I want to ask you here. The first I'll ask you is, how would you define purpose? Because I love the conversation around purpose. It's aided me so much in my life. But I wonder for you how you define it, whether maybe it's a little bit different to me.
For me, purpose is the reason for getting out of bed. It's how you choose to spend your minutes and days and hours of all your time. A little bit of a side note, but this idea of working a 9-to-5 job Monday to Friday to get to the weekend, I just cannot relate to that. Like someone who is in a job that is disinteresting, where they sit at a desk and they kind of hate it, but they tap away pretending to do their work for like 40 hours to get to the weekend so they can party or hang out with their friends. You are wasting 5 of the 7 days of the week. Like imagine wasting 5/7 of your life to live 2/7 of it. That's, for me, purpose is every day I'm going to get out of bed and contribute in a meaningful way to the world and feel fulfilled by that. And as I said, earn my tired, go to sleep at night feeling like I've contributed. Does that sort of answer the question?
It definitely answers the question. And I think I'm wired very similar to you. I know people who are the opposite, who they're like, I go to work purely to be able to pay the bills and everything outside of my life is what interests me.
I've got this vision, this idea about paying the bills. And when I think about that, I imagine someone sitting in an office surrounded by bills and receipts, like just the walls are just covered in it. And they're sitting in this grey room surrounded by receipts and bills at their desk. Imagine living to pay the bills.
I guess the beauty is it's different for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Which is what leads me to my next question. Have you ever thought about if you wake up one day and the purpose for Lune, for this chapter of life, isn't there anymore? What next?
I think I've obviously thought about that because I've been through one lifetime where the thing that I thought defined me, that was my identity, turned out not to be that. And we all saw the dark rabbit hole that I went down, and I don't want to go down that again. And I think coming out of the anorexia and creating Lune, and then Lune being what it is now, shows me that you can reinvent yourself and it's okay if you choose your mind. And as my dad said to me, nothing has to be forever. And that resonates with me now. It didn't when he said it to me when I was 23 years old, but at 43 years old, I think it's that Buddhist concept that nothing stays the same forever. And I think rather than looking for the huge highs and lows in life now, I really like the idea of contentment and finding a peace and a happiness in a quiet way in something where I've been driven by the big highs. in my past. Right now, I don't feel like that about Lune. I'm still very motivated with the business. I feel very lucky to be surrounded by two exceptional business partners who have helped me drive the business forward in the last 12 years. And then an incredible team that are delivering the product to a standard that I am so proud of. And I still get a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment through Lune. But because I've had to evolve throughout the last 13 years of the business, because my own role has changed as a requirement of the business growth, I've had to do little mini reinventions of myself throughout that time. So the question about waking up and if Lune's not my purpose anymore, Lune's changed as it's evolved. So I've also had those mini micro moments of requiring changing of my perspective and a little bit of reinvention. And I think I've learned over those years that if that moment ever happens, I'll actually be okay.
I love that. I'm so
Yeah.
glad to hear that. There's a quote that hit me between the eyes like a bloody Mike Tyson uppercut a couple of years ago that really made me open my horizons to the fact that maybe similar to you, for a long time, I was so set on this being the thing. And when I say this, I mean the podcast and speaking to people in conversations, that if this wasn't the thing that allowed me to live my life, I could not be happy. And so I found it really challenging going to work to earn a living, even with a bit of flexibility at times in my schedule, because it felt like a failure.
Mm.
And then I heard it was James Clear who wrote Atomic Habits that said, I don't know if it was in his book or in one of his like written blog pieces, the tighter you cling to your identity, the harder it is to grow beyond it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I think it's very refreshing to hear because it's given me now almost the analogy that another mate shared with me of this idea of bifocal vision. So to have one eye on the prize, but one scanning the horizon.
I really resonate with that. And I love that quote, by the way, the clinging onto your
Yeah,
identity. I'm going to hold that.
absolutely.
But
Hold it.
I think when my dream was F1, I literally had the blinkers on. And for me, there was no other alternative. And I probably missed opportunities that were occurring either side of me because I was so focused, hyper focused on this goal. But I learned a lot through becoming so ill. And I think even with Lune, I'm better now at that idea of bifocal, about spotting the opportunities that I wasn't expecting. And a lot of those things have happened in the last 13 years. Like Lune has grown, but I've had other opportunities. And because I can still have that like very strong focus on that goal without missing the side things. And that's made life so much more fun and interesting and challenging and rich. And I actually wouldn't have it any other way. So the
I love that.
bifocal is like a really great analogy.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I can see the product of that now because you're in the swings of promoting the book and you're going from city to city. And it feels like, correct me if I'm wrong here, you're really enjoying this process.
Yeah, I love it. It's something that I absolutely, okay, again, another example in Formula One, I started off life as a junior aerodynamicist, but as a junior aerodynamicist, I knew already that I wanted to be a technical director. And there are many, many years of promotions and professional growth from that point to that point. When I started Lune, I had no idea that I'd have 7 stores, 3 in Melbourne, 2 in Sydney, 2 in Brisbane, that I'd write a cookbook, that I'd write a memoir, that I'd go on a book tour speaking about it. Lune grew from a very tiny little pure goal that I wanted to create a croissant that was so good that no Australian had really ever experienced, unless maybe they'd travelled to France and had a croissant fresh out of the oven. I wanted to bring this thing to Australia that didn't exist at the time. And that's a very humble little goal. But once, like, I obviously didn't perfect the croissant. I've worked on bringing the best that I could. But from that has grown things that I could never have anticipated. And yeah, life's been a really incredible journey over the last 13 years, maybe keeping an eye out for those side opportunities linked to Lune that I'd never anticipated.
Can I tell you why I think I love your story so much?
Please.
Is I think it resonates with this idea for me that where you begin isn't always where you end up. in the best and most sometimes challenging ways. And I think it's a beautiful reminder for people who might be listening to this or watching this right now and feel like their life is so far from what they picture for themselves and they're really challenged by that, that I think your luck can turn. And I think
Yeah.
that life can play some cards for you, which makes me think I want to read you something in a second that I wrote in my notes the other day that I haven't shared yet. That was relatable to me, and I wonder whether you'll resonate with it. But I think it's really nice to hear stories like yours.
There's another example of that close to me as well. This idea that there's one way to get to something. And my brother is my equal business partner in Lune, and he's 3 years younger than me. Growing up, he was like the cooler kid. You know, he was rebellious, like partied when I was like studious and academic and studying. He's really, really smart, but he wasn't applied to his studies. And I think back in his like late teens, early 20s, he started at a couple of university degrees, but he didn't love them enough to be motivated to continue with them. And he already had a job in hospitality. His first job was like a barista at a local cafe in the neighborhood. And then he progressed up to shift manager and then venue manager, and then had this idea to open one of Sydney's first small bars when the liquor licensing laws were changed. So he moved up in his early 20s and opened a small dive bar in Sydney, which was super cool. And, you know, no one in Sydney had ever seen anything like this in their city. Then sold that, came back to Melbourne, opened a cafe with friends, had really lived his whole life working in hospitality. And now him and I are the co-owners of Lune. And if you look at the wild variation on our paths and our journeys to find ourselves in exactly the same spot, it's a perfect example that there is a million ways you can get to one thing. And it's nice to remember that there's not one linear path to everything.
I want to read you something that I think might resonate with you. I wrote this the other day, and if this sounds like it doesn't resonate at all, you can be honest.
I'm sure it's going to.
Everybody asks you when you get married, what changes? And for me, in my relationship with Soph, nothing has changed because I treated her like she was my wife from the day that I met her.
Yeah.
I just fell in love with her instantly. And there has been one change, though, for me, which has been a product of just some weird little health challenges the last couple of weeks that have been like had me questioning what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it brought up a new feeling of a different vulnerability I haven't felt before. And it led me to write this. I want to share this with you because I think you'll resonate. So it's titled, I Have Everything to Lose. I have cystic fibrosis, liver disease, diabetes, and portal hypertension. My first doctor told my parents that I'd be better off with cancer, that cystic fibrosis would ruin my life. A life he seemed to believe wouldn't last that long anyways. Because of less than favourable odds, you may think that I have nothing to lose and everything to gain, but I don't quite see it that way. You see, I've always believed that life is a little like a game of poker. Strategy and experience goes a long way, but a little luck certainly plays its part. I wasn't exactly dealt what some would consider a lucky hand, but a good hand isn't defined by the cards you receive, but rather the cards the dealer plays along the way. Throughout my life, I've overcome many of my adversities, a little battered and bruised, but I've never folded my hand. Unlike Texas Hold'em, in the game of life, you only got one hand to play. So despite the uncertainties, I continue to push my chips into the middle. Along the way, I've learned a lot about myself, achieved some things I'm truly proud of, built beautiful relationships with my family and friends, and just so happened to meet and marry the love of my life. That's why I believe I have everything to lose and everything to gain, because I'm all in on the game of life and I just so happen to be on a hot streak. But with everything to lose, my purpose is strong. For every bet I place and choice I make, I have everything to live for, and therefore so much life to gain. I've learned the lesson that most bad luck can eventually be turned into so much good. I don't know if that resonates.
Beautiful.
You know, this idea, and the reason I wanted to share
Everything
that
to
with
lose
you,
and everything to gain.
yeah, and that's what I wanted to share with you because I
Thank
think,
you.
as I said, I think there's this perception that when you go through something so challenging like you have on multiple occasions, where you come so close to that fragile end, that, oh, you know, well, you've got nothing to lose now because you're living on this idea of borrowed time. And I hate that because you have so much good in your life
Yeah.
and you've earned it and you deserve it. And I think it's a beautiful message for people who aren't where they want to be, to hear that luck that you perceive as bad can eventually be turned into so much good.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful passage.
Thank you.
I in a small way, it reminds me of I met up with a very good friend of mine at an event in Brisbane on the weekend at the Writers' Festival. I haven't seen her in a few years, and she has big health challenges as well. And I mean, she looks beautiful. Like, to the outside world, she's thriving, full of vitality. She's big, beautiful smile. She just looks so healthy, but because of her vitality, she can hide her health problems from the world. And I said to her, "How are you?" And she said, "Mixed." And I actually think it's the perfect answer for all of us all the time, because life is never all good or all bad. It is always mixed. And I think I mentioned it before, contentment. Like, someone asked me, like, what does happiness mean to you? And I think happiness as a goal is short term. But contentment as a goal, like finding contentment in the mixed of life, the good and the bad, is the ultimate goal.
I think it's a skill, right?
It is a skill. It's being aware of it, like this bad thing's happening, but also this good thing's happening. It's the everything to lose and everything to gain, and being aware of it and just appreciating the fact that we're here living it all. That's a gift.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're a very beautiful writer. I'm excited
Thank
to read
you.
your book.
I appreciate that.
Is
Can
this
I
your
ask-
first book?
It is my first book.
Congratulations.
It is. Thank you. It's been a process. I didn't give it as much credit as it deserves. It's bloody hard.
It's yeah.
Far out. It's hard to write something you feel really proud of. I think I've always found it easy to write, which made me maybe a little bit naive, which is important in its own right, as we said, that I would be able to tick off the goal without too much friction. Well, there's a bit of friction, so.
Well, you'll love this. I actually wanted to write my entire memoir by myself without a publisher because I didn't want an editor leading me in a direction. I just wanted the first draft to be my words, my view, my story. And then I thought, look, if no publisher ever picks it up, it doesn't matter, I've written it. And it was the process of writing it that was important to me. But then actually it went to a bidding war with 6 publishers, which was crazy. And I was lucky enough to get Simon & Schuster and this amazing editor, Lizzie. And so she got my first draft, and I was proud of it. But also, I'm not a writer. I'm firstly an engineer and then an entrepreneur. And I wouldn't necessarily classify myself a pastry chef, but maybe a croissant chef. And then I've written this story of my life. And she said to me, and this was a humbling moment, she said, "Great, we've got a big column of marble, and now we have to carve out the statue of David."
I can't believe you've said that, because I use that story in the book. I can't believe you said. I've got the statue of David on my arm because I love the story. I love what it symbolizes. I use that analogy in the book.
Well, that is the analogy that my editor used about my book when she first got it. But
isn't that crazy?
It's funny. Yeah. It was okay. So this is a perfect example of, people who might say, "Oh, well, she didn't work out in Formula One because she didn't want to work hard." The editing of the book was so hard, and I loved every single second of it, because every time I sat in front of my computer to polish and hone this column of marble made me feel so productive and so good. And I could see that the book was getting better and better every time I sat down to work on the editing. And you're right, it's so hard, but it was so fulfilling. And I think I love the editing as much as I love the writing of the initial draft. For me, the whole process was incredibly challenging in the most fulfilling way possible.
I love that. The way the example really sits in my mind as such a beautiful story is, I think I've really resonated with Matthew McConaughey's idea from his book Green Lights, which I've loved and listened to on repeat a number of times. This idea of it was always easier for him to figure out who he wasn't than who he was. And I think it's a great reframe for what we deem as failures in life. Like when you come up against an opportunity in life or a challenge that really says something about you, ideally, that you think doesn't make sense. You're like, well, that's not me. You know, I tried this thing. I tried F1 and for whatever
Or I
reason, that's not
tried
me.
flying.
Yeah, or I've thought about being a priest and like, that's not me, right? I think it's easier to figure out who you're not than who you are. And I think that idea of carving away at what is already an imperfect piece of marble to really reveal as you carve and carve and carve and sculpt who you are at the essence, at the core, I think is a
Yeah.
beautiful way to think about it, as opposed to thinking about adding on, adding on, adding on, because we never
It's
think
chipping
about
away, chipping away.
chipping away.
It's a few people have asked me lately, how do I find my purpose? The only way you find it is by trying things.
Yeah.
And the thing I really tried to capture in the book, because I think people feel like there was this very linear, like I got sick and then I've discovered croissants and then I started Lune. But having listened to it, you will know there were so many different things that happened. Like I tried to be an air hostess, and actually I'm not going to give it away because like some of those little things that no one will have ever thought or known about me, there were so many things that I thought I'll give this a try because maybe this is the thing. But then as you've said with Matthew McConaughey, that wasn't my thing. But so I could chip away at the marble and be like, not that, onto the next thing. And you've just got to try stuff. Yeah.
It's actually another thing I talk about in the book is this idea that life is not linear and how hard of a lesson that is to learn. Because you think that one success is the springboard to another. Not always the case.
Not always
And
the
so
case.
you got to be okay with the fact that the tide turns, right? That, you know, it doesn't always go high tide, you know. Low tide comes around and that's just a normal part of life. And
well, also to use an engineering analogy for me, a lot of people think failure is failure. But an engineer, I don't necessarily think the word failure is correct. It's like you have an idea and then you test it. And rather than it failing, it just doesn't work out the way you planned that it would work out. But there's always something to learn from it. And that failure will lead you closer to the answer. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
Lessons.
How good are lessons?
Can I ask you one more question before we finish up?
Sure.
This is a personal question, but throughout the book, you detail on a couple of occasions, you know, some of your love life.
Oh,
Some people that you
here we go,
met.
love life. This is what I've been waiting to be asked. Like, welcome to book number 2.
I love love because I've been so
love
lucky in
love.
it, right? And I loved hearing and listening to some of the relationships that have been a huge part of who you are, huge part of the fabric of your story. I wonder now whether you feel you've been lucky in love, whether love is something that's in your sights, something you want to be devoted to.
I can't believe you're asking this. This is hilarious and brilliant. The 2 boyfriends that I write about in the book were genuinely beautiful humans. And I feel very lucky that they came into my life and I got to have a period of time where I saw and got to experience what a good, healthy relationship is. I think it's no secret that when I got ill, that really came between me and my partner at the time. But we were young, and that illness affected him as much as it affected me in a different way. During the years of the anorexia, it's, to speak frankly, when your weight drops that low, you don't have your period because essentially it's your body saying, well, you're not well enough to look after yourself, let alone nurture a child, so you can't get pregnant. And also you have no libido. And I had zero interest in relationships for like 5 or 6 years where, and I think I say it in a more romantic way, that I had to learn how to love myself again first before being in a relationship. I have, like, if you imagine like the Hollywood cast of extras for that movie where you can imagine every person under the sun, I have dated the cast of extras in the last 10 years and none of them have been right for me. And like, it would be really amazing. Like I often think I'm living this incredible life, which is exciting and sometimes challenging and beautiful and quiet and loud. And it would be really amazing to share that with someone. but I'm not willing to share it with the wrong person. I think it's scarier for me to imagine settling. Like you described, the minute you met Soph, you were already thinking of her as your life partner, as your wife. And I guess with everything in my life, if I'm going to be in a relationship, I want it to be mind-blowing. And I haven't come across that in a long time.
That's a great answer. That's a beautiful answer.
Thanks.
Because I think that's how it should be.
It's how it should be.
That's
Yeah.
how it should be. This has been so much fun. Is there anything else that you want to add to this?
I think you have covered so many topics no one's ever been brave enough to cover with me. This has been incredible. Like I did a radio interview this morning, and then, you know, it was a great radio interview, but they always ask, they're like, how'd you go from Formula One to croissants? And, you know, you have that half-hour conversation and then you're like, right, in an hour I'm going to have that conversation all over again. And this hasn't been that conversation.
Well, I'm glad
This
to
has
hear
been
that.
awesome.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Can I ask you one novelty question?
Please.
There's two parts to this, because I know you're a bit of a foodie. You know, people call it the death row meal. If you had to have a death row meal, so a starter, a main, and a dessert.
Oh, can I tell you this idea of death row, it's like when I was dating Ocker, the Dutch guy, we went on this camping trip up to like the high country in Victoria. And it was around the time this young Australian was going to be executed in Southeast Asia. And I remember reading an article about his death row meal. And every time the idea of a death row meal comes up, I am taken back to sitting in that cafe in Bright, having a coffee and a muffin, reading about this young kid. And like my whole body wants to implode with like sadness at this concept of knowing you are eating your last thing. I can't even imagine myself in that moment, let alone what I would choose.
Can we better name it then and call it the birthday meal? What you eat on your birthday?
Well, can I do part 2 answer to this?
Absolutely, you can.
So, as well as Lune, Cam and I have this fabulous business called Moon. Like you can see a theme running through here. Which we opened in the middle of the pandemic. And like Lune specialises in croissants, Moon specialises in a pastry called a cruller, which is choux pastry piped in a ring and deep fried. It looks a bit like a donut, but the eating experience is wildly different and they're incredible. Anyway, we were going to do a 3-month pop-up of Moon and then move it to a permanent location. But because of the pandemic and Lune's growth, Moon kind of got put on low battery power mode for 4 years. And finally, we're getting ready to move it to its like permanent 7-day-a-week location for the first time ever in Melbourne.
Is it too early to disclose where that will be?
Yes.
So it's Melbourne. So we know it's
Melbourne
it's the
CBD.
mother city of everything you've built.
Yeah. And like I would love for Moons to be all around the country, and it's a lot easier to make a cruller than a croissant. So the chance of more store openings is high.
Okay.
But we were talking to a leasing agent, and this guy told us that a few years ago he was diagnosed with a rare form of terminal cancer. And he was told that he was going to lose his taste and that, like, you know, he was going to lose his life. And his grandmother said to him, while you can still taste food, you should just go out there and experience everything you possibly can. And so he just started to be really, like, he just started to seek out the best of everything. And, he'd sit down at a restaurant and he'd order everything on the menu and he would eat it slowly and savor it and try to pull apart the flavors and understand it and really appreciate it, thinking, I'm never going to eat this again. And then he survived the cancer. And his whole world has changed because before the cancer, food was a thing that, fueled him, but he didn't really think about. And then when he thought he would never eat again, that was when he was like, I want to find the beauty in something as simple as food. And then he survived the cancer. And now he's this avid foodie that he's like, I'm never wasting another meal of my life. I think that's a better answer than my birthday meal.
That's a great answer.
And he's obsessed with Moon.
That's a great answer.
It's like, I want to get a cruller every weekend now. I love them because they're the best version of that I've ever had. So
the second part to my question is, and this is me just, I told you that it was important we had a bit extra time here today because I like to just continue
And I'm
to
a
add things.
chatterbox.
Yeah, as am I. Paris. What does Paris mean to you?
There's been a long period of my life where, okay, I'll start that again. A few years ago, I would have said, from a traveling perspective, when I travel to London, I feel like I'm home. When I travel to New York, I feel desire and ambition. And when I travel to Paris, I feel like I'm in love with the city. And those three cities are like, I'm not an adventurous traveler. If I've got time to go on holiday, I want to go somewhere where I know how it's going to make me feel in a vacation way. And they're the three cities I would have gone to. But then in 2023, I went to Italy proper for the first time. I did go there when I was like in my early 20s. But then I went there with this new set of eyes as this, someone that owns a series of bakeries that specialize in croissants, and through the eyes of a foodie. And I went to Rome, and I am so deeply in love with that city. I think Rome, to me, I know I've like completely deviated from the Paris answer. I will get back to that. But a few months ago, I was in an Uber and it was sunset in Rome, and I was going to catch up with some friends for a beer before I flew out the next morning. And we're driving through this city, and there's modern just unseamlessly combined with ancient. And the person that I'm going to catch up with is this girl called Sarah, who owns one of the best restaurants in Rome. It's called Santo Palato. And, a few years running, she's been voted the best carbonara in Italy.
Which is Rome's traditional dish, right?
Correct. But she does it. Her restaurant isn't kitsch. It doesn't play to the tourists. She has brought traditional Roman food into current day and celebrates it in a way that honors its past and makes it relevant to current day. And I love going to her restaurant because I feel like I'm living modern day Rome as a person that's their city. And I had this really emotional moment in the Uber. Just, this city exists around like 3,000 years of history as a modern current day city. And it has a soul that I don't think I've experienced in another city. But up until falling in love with Rome, that's what I would have described about Paris. And now maybe I adore Paris, and it has been crucial that moment where I inadvertently landed in Paris and had the opportunity to work in the boulangerie. It has been a signposted, required moment to get me to where I am now. But Paris doesn't make me feel in love like Rome makes me feel now, but it did for many years. And I actually haven't been there in a few years because I'm choosing Rome over Paris.
I love that.
That's quite the admission.
Well, what did your dad say? That nothing has to last forever.
Yeah.
So there you
But
go.
the best thing is Paris will hopefully always be there, and I can dip my toe back in whenever I want.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
How about you? What does Paris mean to you?
Well, we finished our honeymoon there, which was really special. And I'd been to Paris before, but I'd been to Paris with my mum and my sister. So it's a little bit different to when you're there with your new wife.
Yeah.
And you're enjoying it romantically.
It's a very romantic city.
It's very romantic, and it was beautiful, and we had so much fun, and there was all of the novelty for Soph because it was her first time. So, there's
That's
never
going to be hard to top now.
Absolutely. There's never a time where you see the Eiffel Tower and don't remark in how beautiful it is, right? But there's certainly the excitement of seeing it for the first time.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful city, and we had so much fun, and Soph loved it. So we're going to have to go back.
Yeah, definitely. And then maybe go to Rome.
We went to Rome too.
Oh, you did? What did
Rome's
you think
mate.
of Rome?
I love Rome. Soph cried when she got to Rome because she couldn't believe she was there.
So a really good friend of mine, she's the most amazing mother, and she gives her kids, I can't remember the name of the program, but essentially when they turn 14, she has 3 children who are now, so it must be 11. When they turn 11, they're sent somewhere in the world with like 11-year-olds from all over the world to have this like immersive experience in a foreign city for 3 weeks. And that's
Oh, wow.
brave to send your 11-year-old.
Absolutely.
So her youngest went to Rome last year at 11. And he came back, and she said it was like a hard 3 weeks because that's her baby and, he's on the other side of the world. He came back, first night home, she was tucking him into bed, and she's like, tell me what was the highlight of the trip. And he's like, Mum, I saw the Colosseum and I touched the Colosseum. And if I can do that, I can do anything. Like, imagine
cool.
giving that gift to your 11-year-old.
That's very cool.
It's very cool. And like, the enormity of it wasn't lost on him.
No, it's
Like-
because it's special. It's otherworldly.
It is. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, it is from another world. It's from 3,000 years
Mhm.
ago. Like, we're a very different place now, but it still exists there. And Romans operate on a normal daily basis around that, which is for me the incredible thing about that city.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, you're incredible, Kate.
You
I've
too.
loved this so much. I've enjoyed it. I'm excited that maybe the next time I see you, we can enjoy a croissant at Lune together.
Hopefully, we'll
That would
make
be
that
the goal.
happen.
Absolutely.
I'll try and recreate one of Soph's croissants in Paris with Nutella.
With Nutella,
correct?
she's a Nutella fan.
I'll have to get a jar of Nutella.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. That was fun.
That was amazing.
Did you enjoy that?
Loved it. Did you enjoy it?
Absolutely.